location. So if you're interested in sponsoring, we got paperwork there, plus you can do it online. Plus there's a link in the Hamilton Town Hall site. So we'd love to have you sponsor one of the veteran graves or have a wreath placed around town. All right, so I'm going to just go around the room real quick and recognize people that are here. Sean Fallon that just came through the door and his buddy. So if I can have the World War II generation veterans please stand. Easier said than done. So this young man here, you might remember last year, he was given the French Legion of Honor medal. And of course I asked him today where the medal is and how come he's not wearing it. He's 93 years young, soon to be 94. And we got Henry Stelline over here, who's even younger. He's 97, soon to be 98. And our birthday boy over here, the Colonel Corning, happy birthday. He's 93 years young today. 94. Oh my God. That's right. Congratulations. We look forward to having you here every year moving forward. All right, if I can have the Korean War veterans stand if you're in the room. Unfortunately, our veterans are not here today, but thank you for the Korean War veterans. And if I can have the Vietnam era service members stand.
Come on, get over here.
Thank you. And the post-Vietnam, Somalia, Grenada, Panama, Gulf One. And post-era, Afghanistan, Iraq, and current. John Freiberg at the head table. And anybody I missed? And of course, I want to recognize our re-elected favorite rep in the area, Brad Hill. He won a clean, hard battle and came out successful with a majority of vote. Congratulations. I want to recognize our police officers in town over here at the table to our left. Thank you for coming. Fire department over here to the right. Hamilton and Wenham selectmen. VSOs. Veteran service officers. Let me see if I'm missing anybody around the hall here. I think I caught up with most everybody. And then if you have been following the events, we're going to have an event in the park this afternoon at 12 noon. This is Hugh Geist. About, I don't know if it was a year ago, we discussed what we thought would be a good project for Hugh for his Eagle Scout, and did some research. We looked at the vintage photos when they dedicated the Patton Park tank and come up with a color scheme. And for Hugh's Eagle project, he redid the tank, and I think you've seen it. It looks fabulous downtown. And if you're unable to make the event at 12, Hugh has a poem that he's going to read down there, so he's going to read it here for those who won't be able to make it.
Alright, this took me a really long time because I'm not very good at English, but
The poem's called Veterans. Thanks to everybody who served so far and continues to. We look back at 100 years with honor in our eyes, from the ocean to the desert and beyond the farthest skies. We thank the men and women who stand up for our rights, walking into battle morning, noon, and night. A nation on your shoulders every single day. For your peace and safety, we will always pray. So although you may be far from home, never feel alone, because you are in our hearts and minds, no matter where you roam. Gratitude to the bravest warriors is what we have to give, to show respect for the freedom that you provide, we live. Should you by chance not make it home, your fight is not in vain. You have paved the way for future youth to carry on your flame. Thank you.
As you know, with Eagle Scout projects, you're supposed to train the trainer, basically. And basically, Hugh did the project 99.9% himself. So it was a great project for the town. We had attempted to do the cannons with another Eagle Scout candidate, but the lead paint content was too high in the cannons, and they have to be stripped, and it's a more intensive project. Chris Romano, who is not here, is doing another Eagle project for his Eagle award, and he's doing a electronic digital recognition of all the veterans in the cemetery. So he's identifying all the veterans in the cemetery, and we're going to have a link at the post so you can click on the link, and your veteran relative or loved one will come up on the site, and then we'll try to hook it into the town as well. All right, so moving forward. Our guest speaker for the day, I served with the guest speaker in the military for years, so it's my pleasure to have him here today. John Feiberg is a retired Command Chief Warrant Officer. That's a CW5. That's as high as you can get. We had 40 years of service in the U.S. Army Special Forces on active duty and also in the reserve. He's deployed numerous times to include Desert Storm, Provide Comfort, Just Cause, Uphold Democracy, OEF, and OIF. Since his retirement, he's been working in counterinsurgency as an advisor in Afghanistan from 2012 to 14, and as a defense contractor, providing exercise support and military advisor training to USACOM, which is one of the large branches of the military, and NATO, overseas in Europe and Afghanistan. His civilian occupation, he worked domestically and overseas in high-risk areas as a security consultant, specializing in personal protection systems, and anti-terrorism. He holds a certificate in proficiency in security management from the University of Massachusetts Lowell and a bachelor degree in liberal arts from the Harvard University. We're going to do a little something different this year, not necessarily pertaining to Veterans Day. I asked them to do a intelligence kind of briefing on what's going on with the military around the world. So thank you, and please welcome John Freiberg.
Well, thanks for having me here, Greg. It's a special honor to be here on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. And I believe it's the 100th anniversary of Veterans Day if you include the time that we recognize Armistice Days. So kind of a special day for veterans here in the States. So anyway, Greg asked me to come down and spend about 40 to 45 minutes talking about the status of the current military that we have and what it's doing overseas. And so with that, we'll begin the brief. So this is what I'm going to cover. I I guess the print, for those in the back of the room, is kind of small, so I'll briefly say what's on the slide. I'm going to do an intro, talk about the current status of the military, national security defense issues that the country's facing right now, the role of the different services, the conflicts around the world where we're engaged, and current and future threats that the country faces. So, first of all, the first section of the brief is going to be the current status of our military. We got some, by my opinion, some pretty good leadership. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, former Marine four-star commander of CENTCOM, pretty much knows his stuff. He's staying out of the politics as best he can, and he's leading the Department of Defense with a pretty sure hand. The Chief of Staff of the services, the Joint Staff, is Joe Dunford, another Marine, four-star. He's a Boston native and fervent Red Sox fan. I briefed him several times in Afghanistan when he was the commander of forces there. And first thing he asked was I a Red Sox fan? I said, well, not really, but I love the Patriots. And the briefing went downhill from there. So the size of our military, the Air Force is doing well. They always scream for more money. We know how they can be. They do, in fact, need more transport aircraft, C-17s, to move troops, supplies, and equipment around. They're asking for 20 more squadrons of aircraft. They're probably not going to get it. They've got a lot of ISR, which those are the drones, the Reapers, the Predators, the Eye in the Sky that you've heard about. So they've got enough, but they want more. It's the Air Force. So now the Navy, they've got the smallest fleet in years. Some of you remember when Reagan wanted a 500-ship fleet. I think we're down to, way below that. They're trying to rebuild it again, but it takes money and it takes Congress allocating funds for that. And it takes years to build these ships. They've had some problems with some of their procurement, but overall they're doing okay. The Army's probably the smallest it's been in years, even though we're engaged all over the world. We've been doing the current fight and not concentrating on the fight of the future against big armies. So things like artillery and tanks have suffered while we've been doing our counterinsurgency operations overseas. The Marines, they're doing well. They're updating their equipment. They're updating their vehicles. They're about the right size. There's several studies underway to have a relook at what their mission should be in the future. Equipment-wise, the Air Force got their J-35. It's been a troubled program, a lot of cost overruns, pilot helmets that don't work, but they're sorting those things out. Special Operations Forces have the new CV-22, which is the tilt rotor, takes off like a helicopter, and the engines kind of rotate through, and then it flies like a plane. Kind of a nice plane to have. It was also troubled initially, but they're getting the kinks worked out. Regards to vehicles, the armored personnel carrier that we have now is called the Bradley. It's been around for a couple of decades now. That needs to be replaced. Current small arms that we have is the M4, the M16 rifle. The Army keeps looking for a replacement for that, but year after year they really don't find anything better than that, even though everybody says there should be one better. Sniper weapons, there's a lot of sniper weapons out there. Even in special operations, I think we get 5 or 6 different sniper weapons assigned to a 12-man ODA. And it's kind of like pick the weapon for the mission. And within the regular services, it's the same thing. It's like every month they come out with some new sniper rifle out there. I already talked about the drones, big growth. ISR is intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Basically the eye in the sky. In the anti-terrorism fight, these armed drones are doing a lot of work overseas. You don't read about it too much, but they're constantly hammering terrorist base camps and hidden high-value terrorist targets. Technology is playing a big role, and it seems year after year technology becomes even more important. A lot of money goes into research and development and acquisition of new systems. C4I is command, control, computers, communications, and intelligence. And it's just incredible how a networked systems can do now in regards to generating intel and then disseminate it across all the major components and services. Personnel recruitment's a challenge. 70% of the American youth between 18 and 25 years old have either got a drug record, they have a criminal record, or they're just overweight. So that really shrinks down the recruiting base. Once we get a person into the services, they tend to stay. The pay's pretty darn good. Benefits, there's always a fight in Congress, chopping away at benefits, but it hasn't eroded too much, but we always have to be on watch. And the veteran service organizations like the American Legion, they're doing good work down here in D.C., protecting our benefits that I can see. Deployments are killing marriages and reenlistments. If you're in the 82nd Airborne or one of the Marine divisions, you're deploying overseas 6 months, 9 months, or a year, every other year. My last 15 years, I retired in 2012. My last 15 years of service, I averaged 90 days of home a year. That's how much deployments are affecting marriages and people who decide to make a career. Gender integration is a big deal now. In 2016, the Department of Defense said that women can join any military occupational specialty in any service. So the combat arms, armor, artillery, and infantry is open to women, including all the branches of service that have a special operations force. There's a lot of excitement about that. Not a lot of women are actually going the route of soft, because quite frankly, it's pretty hard. But some are making it 15 and graduating from the very hard 62-day Ranger course down at Fort Benning. And then now some of them are serving in Ranger Regiment right now. The Marine Corps is pushing the women through their combat arms, and some of them are being successful. So I think in the future we'll see a lot of women in the combat arms. There's a little bit of changing of standards, but that's another controversy. I won't go into that here. Some challenges for our military and for our national defense. First thing is determining what is our national security. So I'll talk more about that later. You have to identify what the threats are. It's always a challenge keeping up with technology. We have congressional interference. If you're a senator from Connecticut, you're pushing the Black Hawk, because Sikorsky makes that in Connecticut. If you're a senator from Maine, you want ships to be built up there in the shipyard in Bath. And that goes across all 50 states. So there's a lot of congressional interference. We're buying weapon systems that we don't need and not buying weapon systems that we do need. So the Department of Defense has their work cut out with getting Congress to give us what we really need instead of what Congress thinks we need. The other part of it is keeping the politics from hurting the military. Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, he's doing a really good job there thus far. And then, of course, the constant budget fight, the continuing resolutions. It's hard to do long-term planning. So, national security and defense. What is it? Well, the White House came out with, in 2018, an 18-page document saying what the national security strategy is. The Department of Defense came out a couple of months later with what our national defense strategy is. And basically, these two documents identify 6 focus areas. Terrorism, which is still ongoing around the world, counterinsurgency and stability operations, near-peer competition. That basically, near-peer means who could compete with us militarily. That would be Russia, that would be China. Cyber operations, continuing threat from a number of nations in regards to our internet and our computer systems, both in the corporate world, defense, and in our government. Information operations, some people might call this psychological operations. The art of persuasion, using social media. We're way behind the 8 ball on that one as well. And then, of course, something called hybrid warfare, which the defense analysts say is across that section of competition between states, between peace and war. And it's not like you're in a general conflict, but you're in competition, and there's a lot of dirty tricks that happens in that gray zone area, that hybrid warfare area. So, what's the Army doing? Well, they're staying busy. They're doing counterinsurgency stability operations in Afghanistan right now. We recently concluded a 4-year campaign to degrade ISIS in Iraq. That campaign is continuing in Syria. We're doing something. We're not exactly fighting now in Afghanistan. as we did for 10 or 12 years earlier. What we're doing now is something called the TAA mission. That's Train, Advise, and Assist. So we're doing what's called proxy war. We're training up local indigenous armies to do the fight, but we're making sure they have the proper advice, the proper way forward, and the proper training to do that. We're doing what's called security force assistance, which is very similar to TAA, Train, Advise, and Assist in Africa. I think there's like 56 different countries in Africa. There's probably 6 that are democratically elected. There's probably about 30 undergoing some type of conflict or insurrection or insurgency. And so we're trying to help out several of those that might be an ideal area for ISIS or Al-Qaeda or other terrorist organizations to set up. So we're actively engaged in getting these local indigenous armies trained up so they can conduct their own anti- and counter-terrorist operations. And we're very, very busy in the Pacific, the Indo-Pacific region, and we're busy conducting exercises with NATO in Europe. So the Air Force is busy as well. They're doing airstrikes in support of the Army and the Marines in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Syria. They're constantly moving folks, equipment, and supplies overseas, back, and into theater lift. They're operating the drones in Somalia, Yemen, and Nigeria. Some of them is just ISR, the eye in the sky, developing intel. Some of it is armed, hitting terrorist base camps, hitting high-value targets. So the picture up on the right-hand side, upper right, that's the MQ-9 Reaper. It's the latest evolution of what I call the heavy drone. That thing's seeing work all around the world, principally in the Middle East, North Africa, and Afghanistan. The Air Force has bases all around the world, just as they did before. They're building a new one in Nigeria. It's costing $22 million so they can operate drones out of there. I talked about the F-35 already. Not only is it a U.S. aircraft, but many of our allies are adopting the F-35 fighter as well, which hopefully will bring the average cost of the F-35 down. And then, of course, let's talk about Space Command. We'll see where that goes. The Navy's busy. One of the principal duties of the Navy is ensuring freedom of navigation. Right now, 2 adversaries are opposing the Navy in that ability to do that. That's Iran and the Persian Gulf, where all the oil flows through. And then China, which is slowly expanding its area of influence in the Pacific region. Then, of course, you have the threat of the Russian Navy in the Mediterranean, the North Atlantic. So our U.S. Navy works with NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, naval forces all the time. The Navy's providing support to CENTCOM and AFRICOM. They do airstrikes off the carriers. They provide basing. They provide transport. And then occasionally they get to use their cruise missiles as well. Navy's also very busy in the Pacific region, Pacific Ocean. The Marines are busy. They're doing their normal fleet operations in conjunction with the Navy. The lower left-hand corner of that is a Marine mortar crew taken in September 2018, providing fire support to the Syrian Democratic Front in Syria. So they're right in the middle of the action. The Marines are back in Helmand Province in Afghanistan again. At one time they had 20,000 troops there. Now they've got about 1,000 troops in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, and they're doing the Train, Advise, and Assist mission, helping the Afghans fight that fight. And of course, the Marines are all over the Pacific engaging in exercises. They just completed an exercise with the Japanese Marine Naval Forces. Okay, and then of course the Coast Guard, they've been extremely busy. They're doing the roles that we envision them doing: counter-drug, border security, humanitarian relief, search and rescue, and they're also deployed in the war zones overseas. I remember being in Afghanistan at Bagram Air Base, walking by this little compound, and lo and behold, I see the Coast Guard flag. It's a landlocked country. What the hell are they doing here? And so I did a little investigation. Basically, they had a 20-man detachment, and their job was to inspect all the shipping connexes leaving Afghanistan so they could travel the different routes through all the ports and make it back to the States. And that was basically, customs duty and making sure everything was packaged correctly so it didn't get held up in transit. All right, and then of course we have what's sort of our fifth service. It's United States Special Operations Command. That's your soft guys, Special Operations Forces. U.S. SOCOM is based at MacDill Air Force Base down in Florida. The top line is a bunch of acronyms. I'll read them off: direct action, strategic reconnaissance, unconventional warfare, foreign internal defense, civil affairs, counterterrorism, military operations, military information support operations, which is basically a new version of psychological operations. CPWMD is counter-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, security force assistance, counterinsurgency, hostage rescue and recovery, and then foreign humanitarian affairs. So those are the those are the core missions or the core activities of the soft guys. And that's a joint command. They're deployed to over 70 countries at any time around the world, plus or minus 10, but basically averages out to 70. The five components of U.S. SOCOM is the United States Army Special Operations Command, the Marine Special Operations Command, the Naval Special Warfare Command, Air Force Special Operations Command, and then of course JSOC, which is the Joint Special Operations Command. And that includes SEAL Team 6, the Navy SOC guys, and also Delta, the Army SOC guys. 70,000 operators, staff, and support, probably about 10,000 operators, the rest support staff, all of that type of stuff. And here's where U.S. SOCOM has their, what the TSOCs that are called Theater Special Operations Command. Those are the regional commands around the world. So, where is the U.S. involved in current conflicts around the world? We're going to briefly go through that. Starting with these red circles from left to right, you have the leftmost circle is the Lake Chad region. Lake Chad is a huge lake that, due to climate control, is shrinking by the day. But there are 4 different countries that intersect here. It's turned an ungoverned failed area, which means the 4 different countries don't extend any government control or services into that area. So it's ideal for insurgents and terrorists to set up their basis of support to win over the support of the population, either through coercion, intimidation, or by providing their own version of government services. We've got conventional forces and soft forces in all those countries trying to counteract the growth of insurgent groups and terrorist groups there. So we're actually involved here. One of the Air Force bases I told you that they constructed in Nigeria has over 1,200 service people there. So not many people know that, but that's what's going on there. A year ago, 4 Special Forces guys died in Nigeria in an ambush. They were involved in counterterrorism activities too. So it's a small war, and it's costly in terms of money, and people are dying there. The next circle going up, going into Europe, is the Ukraine. We have folks there. And then when you go down in a clockwise direction, the 4 o'clock direction, the next circle would be Syria. And right next to that is Iraq. Right next to that is Afghanistan. South of that is Yemen. The bottom circle is Somalia. And then over on the right-hand side of the Pacific is the Philippines. And we're going to detail in those areas as well. So Afghanistan, we invaded in 2001 with about 300 Special Forces guys, teams of Central Intelligence Agency guys carrying satchels of money, and a few Air Force combat controllers to call in airstrikes. They were only supposed to establish liaison with the resistance group, the Northern Alliance, and unforeseen by everybody is they just promptly marched into Kabul and Kandahar and took over the country. That was what we thought was going to take 6 months to 9 months, actually took about a couple of months, so pretty successful. In 2002, 10th Mountain Division of the Army went in, Special Forces stayed there. We had about 8,000 folks there. It was quiet for a couple of years there in Afghanistan. The invasion of Iraq in March 2003 was sort of a distraction, sucked away a lot of the resources, a lot of media attention. The Taliban took advantage of that, supported by Pakistan, a neighboring country. And before we know it, by 2006, we had an insurgency on our hands, and it was growing. And the troops that we had in country weren't good enough to stop it. They were good enough, we didn't have enough of them. And then the Afghan army in its infancy wasn't big enough and wasn't trained enough to fight the insurgency. So year after year, the insurgency grew. So finally, President Obama decided, okay, I need 30,000 more troops in, based on recommendations from the Department of Defense. We had what was called our surge of troops, and we went into the counterinsurgency mode. And it worked for a while, and then we had the speech by President Obama at West Point saying, surge is over, our guys are coming home, we won it. 2012, we downsized to about 9 or 10,000 folks, and they began what was called Security Force Assistance Mission, training the Afghans, putting the Afghans in the lead for the fight. Didn't really go so well. 2015, NATO said, okay, our commitment to Afghanistan is over. The U.S. at this time, the end of 2015, said they were going to downsize to 1,000 people in the embassy based in Kabul, one military base. Didn't happen. We're back up to about 16,000 Americans and about 5,000 Europeans from NATO. And we've got what we're undertaking now called the South Asia Strategy, which was introduced in August of 2017 by President Trump and Jim Mattis. And the plan was to hit in the summer of 2017 and early 2018 the Taliban. So we drive them to the peace table. Hasn't happened. At this point in time, the Taliban controlled more area and more people in Afghanistan than they ever had since they were overthrown in 2001. So that's Afghanistan. Iraq, we invaded in 2003. I was there in 2004, and I heard the commander there, General Ricardo Sanchez, says, we don't have an insurgency. The war's over, we invaded, we won. And then it wasn't about a year later, we recognized we had an insurgency. And it got worse and worse and worse. I went back in 2005, 2006, and that was probably the worst time of the war, from my perspective. A lot of sectarian strife, the Sunni population and the Sunni insurgent forces were targeting Shia civilians and killing them, and then the Shias were responding. Mostly the Sunnis used car bombs, and the Shias used assassinations and other types of stuff. So it just got worse and worse and worse. Petraeus was the commander over at the time. He talked to President Bush. He said, you know what? I need some help. I need a surge of troops. So the folks that were supposed to go home after a year-long tour didn't go home, and 30,000 more troops showed up. And that kind of stabilized the area and set the stage for withdrawal in 2011. The surge of troops was one of those deployment hardships, because units that deployed for a year, went home, expecting to have a year off before the next deployment, were called up after they could be at home 4 months and sent back. I know people that were on a 12-month deployment in the Army that got extended to 15 months. They're on a plane, they fly home to Fairbanks, Alaska. They don't leave the airstrip. They're told to get back on the plane, go back to Iraq. That's how bad it was. And that's how small our Army is. And we got to do that to folks. And these are guys that have done repeated deployments as well. So we hit 2011. Basically, the negotiations with the Iraqi parliament didn't go well. They didn't want to see us there. They said, we got this. Of course, that was the Shia government saying we got this, and they didn't want us interfering and ensuring that the Sunni people had representation in the government. And that set the stage for another Sunni insurgency, which grew. ISIS came about, took hostage the entire insurgency. There are many, many different Sunni insurgent groups. ISIS, through its terrorist activities and tactics, took control of the entire insurgency, consolidated it, and then they took Anbar province, they took Mosul, and they even threatened Baghdad. And the Iraqi army folded like Napoleon. And then it's been a long, hard fight over the last 3-4 years to get the Iraqis trained up and equipped and led so they could turn around and retake the major cities. At this point in time, ISIS is degraded significantly. They don't hold any territory to speak of. However, they are once again an insurgent group, and they're still causing problems. Syria was a country that supported the Iraqi Sunni insurgents early on when we went to Iraq. In 2012, they started having their own problems with rebels. Rebel groups formed up. The Assad government retaliated with some very oppressive and drastic measures. And then the rebel groups grew even more. We got involved around 2014, and the CIA tried to stand up some rebel groups. U.S. Army Special Forces stood up the Syrian Democratic Front, and then we had some conventional troops helping out in a support way. Basically, we were supporting rebel groups against Assad, and we were supporting the Kurds, which basically the Kurds enclave is in the north and the northeast of the country. Over time, our involvement in Syria was less about the Assad regime and more about defeating ISIS. ISIS is on the ropes in Syria, but once again, they're reverting back to from a force that held territory in cities and large areas to an insurgency that operates underground using guerrilla warfare tactics. We're remaining in Syria for the time being. The intent is to make sure that ISIS is completely degraded and defeated. We also want to degrade Iranian and Russian influence there. How we do that, I don't know. Yemen, a place that many people don't recognize as a conflict area, but there's been a raging civil war going for a long time. Once again, this is a Sunni-Shia fight. The Iranians are supporting the Shias, which are the Hutu, and they're based in the north part of the country. And Saudi Arabia, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and us, the United States, is supporting the supposed government forces, also the Sunni population. We're providing support to Saudi Arabia with advice, with targeting info. That would be the ISR, the drones that fly overhead, the eye in the sky, and also with a lot of refueling. The Trump administration, the DOT, just announced recently this past week that we will no longer refuel Saudi aircraft because of the bombing that's taken place in the populated cities where the Shia live. A lot of humanitarian issues, a lot of civilian casualties. So Congress was calling on the DOT to stop the refueling, which we have. It's symbolic because now the Saudis have their own refueling capability and the UAE with refueling capability are refueling Saudi aircraft and we're refueling UAE aircraft. So it's a political win. It goes into the sphere of information operations, but from a practical purpose, nothing really has changed in the air or on the ground. It's a big humanitarian crisis. It's probably going to get worse. Right now, it's a stalemate, but there is a push to take the remaining areas of the Hutu rebel group and see if they can be defeated over the next year. We'll see what happens there. But it's been going on for a long time. I suspect it will continue to go for a long time. Somalia. Everybody heard about Black Hawk Down. That's probably the first time many people even heard about Somalia. It started out as an area of Russian and U.S. competition during the Cold War. Once the Cold War ended, when we declared victory, we didn't care about long geographical areas where the failed states were. A humanitarian crisis evolved in the early 90s. People were starving. UN intervened with food supplies. The U.S. supported the UN mission. And then we saw the hijacking of food supplies. So we turned around and got involved and put in military forces, between special operations forces, trying to hunt down these rebel groups that were killing UN workers and seizing the food meant for people starving and use it for their own purposes. There was a fight called the Battle of Mogadishu. Some of you may remember, 18 Americans died. They made a movie of it, Black Hawk Down. One of my best friends died in that battle. And then President Clinton at the time said, you know what, we don't really need to be there. It's not in our national interest. We're losing people. It's costing us money. And so we pulled out. So then we saw years of neglect, more conflict, piracy. I think there's a movie made out about the Nebraska, Alabama that was captured by the pirates and then rescued by the SEALs. I happen to be over there at the area. I happen to be at the major base over here called Camp Lawaniere in Djibouti, just north of Somalia. And I was the operations officer at SOC element. And from a staff perspective, I saw a good deal of how that went down. Pretty interesting how that whole story went down. We saw the rise of Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group, is somewhat affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Right now, Al-Shabaab probably controls 2/3 of the territory of Somalia, and probably about 20%, 30% of the population. We've got special operations forces in there training their counterterrorism forces. We've got conventional forces from the Marines and from the Army training their regular troops. We got drones hitting targets there whenever they find them. I think we're probably, with the armed drones, we're probably hitting 2 or 3 targets a month once we identify a high-value target in Somalia. That's not going to get any better. The Ukraine, this is an area where the Russians have been practicing what's called hybrid warfare. Started out with the Russian annexation of Crimea, and then the eastern Ukraine. There's a lot of ethnic Russians that live in Crimea and the eastern Ukraine. The Russians intervened on the basis that the ethnic Russians were being discriminated against and repressed, so that gave them the political reasoning for supporting the rebels. Little green men, these are Russian soldiers who pose as Ukrainian freedom fighters. Hybrid warfare, Russia's using all sorts of different ways of attaining their national interests and objectives. That's that space between peace and conflict. They're very good at it. Their masters at it. They're way better at it than we are. They don't have the political constraints that we have. They don't have the congressional oversight. So there's a lot of stuff they can do that we can't. Right now it's kind of a stalemate. Putin pretty much has what he wants. I don't see him pushing to get any more territory out of the Ukraine, but he wants to keep what he has. There's ongoing fighting from time to time, artillery duels go on all the time, trench warfare, tank warfare, but it's on the low end of conflict, and that's probably going to, eventually the eastern Ukraine will probably become part of Russia or some sort of a separate independent state. That's my projection. We'll see what happens. We're providing equipment, we're providing training, we participate in exercises with the Ukrainian military, and NATO's also involved in Ukraine. Africa, we talked about it already. The place is loaded with civil wars. There's humanitarian crises all over the place. There are sanctuaries for all sorts of terrorists and certain groups. Al-Shabaab in Somalia. ISIS is all over northern Africa. Al-Qaeda is all over northern Africa. Boko Haram is operating out of Nigeria. And then there's splinter groups all over the place. And sometimes these splinter groups, they turn around and they change allegiance from time to time, going between Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other different factions. Some of the hot areas we covered: Somalia, Libya, Mali, the Lake Chad Basin region. The Philippines, they just had a year-long flight to southern island of the Philippines at the very bottom of that ring. That's it's called Mindanao. I've never been there, but there was a year-long flight between rebels affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Philippine military to free that city of control of the rebel group. The Marines have been in there helping, Special Operations have been helping. There's all sorts of terrorist and insurgent groups that have been operating there. You have Abu Sayyaf, New People's Army, and then of course ISIS. The Joint Special Operations Task Force, Philippines, they've had Special Forces, Civil Affairs, PSYOPs there. Providing ISR, the Iron Sky. They're providing training, advice, and assistance, and also equipment. So what are the threats that we have facing us? As a result of that revision of our national security strategy and our national defense strategy, we've identified that our biggest threat is no longer terrorism. It's no longer conducted counterinsurgency. Our biggest threat comes from what we call near-peer adversaries: China, Russia, and some other states. So we're going to look at that real quick here. China, they're expanding their influence. They're expanding diplomatically, they're expanding economically, they're expanding militarily, they're increasing their territorial control, they're taking over islands in the Pacific. They have a well-defined long-range strategy. They operate in the gray zone, competition area, or hybrid warfare, if you will. Freedom of navigation is a big deal with them as they claim these islands and establish a military presence there. They're declaring territorial waters up to so many miles. So they are building military bases. I mentioned the nation of Djibouti in Africa, where I was stationed for a time. They're building a base that's bigger than the 2,200-man Navy base that we have there now. They have a lot of economic projects going on all throughout the world, especially in Africa. There's a lot of diplomatic confrontation between the U.S. and China. There's always the Taiwan issue, Formosa, or Taiwan, whatever you want to call it. South Asia is another area where we're sometimes working with them in cooperation, and sometimes we're confronting them diplomatically. And then, of course, they're very well engaged in espionage and cyber warfare, and that's all in the news. Korea, basically, we're worried about their nukes. I don't think there's a chance of a general war in the Korean Peninsula. We can see that happening yet. South Korea and Japan are very interested in seeing how this gets resolved. It's been in the news. The Koreans have been using cyber warfare against us. There are some humanitarian issues with the Korean regime and how it is providing services to their population. I think every other year there's reports of famine, but that's one of those areas where the Trump administration and the Defense Department is actively engaged in managing something that could become a conflict. In Iran, we're all familiar with Iran. At the same time that the Iranians had thousands of forces in Iraq fighting side by side with American forces defeating ISIS from 2015 to 2018, they were our opponents in Syria, supporting the Assad regime, the government of Syria's forces. So it's kind of interesting dynamic there. Friends in one nation, but trouble across the border, they're the aggressor, they're the enemy. Iran's a big supporter of terrorists and insurgents. The latest report by the State Department on terrorist organizations from 2019 says Iran is the biggest state-sponsored supporter of terrorism around the world. They're an opponent of Israel, which we consider to be very friendly with. They are supportive of Shia movements that are in opposition to Sunni populations and Sunni governments, for instance, Yemen. They've got a history of 40 years of an anti-U.S. stance dating back to the takeover of the American embassy in Tehran, I think it was 1979. Once again, they are exercising their rights of navigation in the Persian Gulf and encroaching on our freedom of navigation. So our U.S. Navy is constantly being shadowed by Iranian military, Iranian naval boats and ships, and probably vice versa, I'm sure. They're trying to expand their influence through North Africa and the Middle East, and at the same time diminish the influence of the United States. Russia, we see under Putin what's called a resurgent Russia. He's a former KGB official, ruthless, canny, smart. He's pretty much probably a leader for life. For the most part, the Russians love him. Russian people are very nationalistic. I've spent some time there. They're great people, proud of their country, proud of their heritage, and they love Putin for the most part. Russians are master at hybrid warfare once again. They've taken part of Georgia, they've taken the Crimea, they've taken part of the Ukraine. We invented what some people call Cold War II. Russia's confronting NATO, the U.S., and Europe, and in other parts of the world. The circle in red down there is where Georgia is, the nation of Georgia, that is partially occupied by Russian troops to this day. The circle in green is the Ukrainian Crimea, where the Russians and their ethnic Russians that live in Ukraine occupy the eastern part of Ukraine and all of Crimea. And now the area of concern is the Baltic regions, the countries of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and some people say Sweden, and Norway itself, which is that big blue circle up there. So NATO is very concerned about Russian aggression, Russian encroachment in the Baltic states. All three of those states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, has a sizable Russian ethnic population. So once again, they're worried about what happened in Ukraine, what happened in Crimea, happening in the Baltic states. With that being said, NATO just concluded on 6th November the largest NATO exercise in decades called Trident Juncture. The scenario is that NATO forces come to the rescue of Norway due to aggression by a neighboring state coming from the north. So that would be Russia crossing over the Arctic Circle, over the North Cape of Scandinavia there, what's called the North Cape, and then coming down the coastal route of Norway. So the scenario has Marines and Air Force and Army of 30 different nations participating in the defense of southern Norway and then the advance against the menacing aggressors from the north, which would be called the Russians. So here's a little bit more on Trident Juncture. They have a maritime operation area, so that's that left oval circle. The right oval circle is where they did their air operations, and then there's a smaller circle where the land operations took place, principally in Norway. So it involved 30 different NATO countries, including the non-NATO members, the non-NATO nations of Sweden and Finland. Both those countries are concerned about possible Russian aggression down the road. So that's our future outlook. We're worried about near-peer competition. Its focus is on Russia, Iran, China, and Korea. And our focus when it comes to spending money and procuring systems is on big weapon systems. Artillery, tanks, ships, aircraft. At the same time, we're going to be faced with what we call small wars, conducting stability operations in countries like Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. We have our counterterrorism mission. The terrorist threat is not going away. There are more terrorist groups now than prior to 9/11. There are more terrorists out there now prior to 9/11. They're operating out of more places now prior to 9/11. We're still going to be doing counterinsurgency where there are groups threatened by insurgent rebels. We're going to be doing stability operations. We're going to be doing security force assistance, or what we might call proxy warfare, training indigenous host nation forces to fight the fight so that we don't have to. And nuclear threat always in the background. I forget how many nations out there have nukes. We know Russia does, we know China does, we know Israel does, I believe the UK does, South Africa perhaps, Korea. So the nuclear threat, you're only 30 seconds away from something really bad happening there. What's most likely going to happen? We're going to experience more small wars, information operations, social media, whatever. That's going to be getting more important down the road. Nations are going to be operating in the gray zone. Conventionally, there's not really a military in the world that can fight us from a conventional standpoint. So what they got to do is find those areas that they can leverage diplomatically, economically, socially, and try to gain their objectives using that. So I think we're going to see gray zone warfare. Cyber warfare is a huge deal. It's going to get more important down the road. So the challenge is to be ready for the near-peer fight with Russia and China, but still attend to the likelihood that we're going to have small wars down the future. Cybersecurity, once again, the national government, the White House, and DOD's come out with new cybersecurity strategy for 2018, recognizing that, hey, this fight's important and we're behind the eight ball on it. Our adversaries there, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and others, terrorist groups, insurgent groups, criminal organizations. We've got a number of cybersecurity organizations. At the very top, we have the National Security Agency. That's followed by the United States Cyber Command, that Joint Cyber Command. On the lower left-hand corner, you see the icons for the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Army. They all have their own cyber commands, and there are a huge number of DOD organizations concerned with training and other matters with cybersecurity. So we're starting to get smart on it. We're behind the eight ball, but we're gaining some ground now. Technology is going to play a big future in the military forces. On the upper left-hand corner, you see a soldier wearing night vision goggles. That's changed the art of warfare on the ground so that night operations are more frequent, more effective, and for most of the last 20, 30 years, the U.S. has had the advantage on that. Just below that is what's called an exoskeleton frame. There's a lot of research going into outfitting the infantryman with a mechanical fueled device that will help him walk faster, run faster, and carry a heavier load. There's just 120 pounds in a rucksack wasn't enough to let the infantryman to carry more. Some of you guys might know what that means. Just below that, you see the figure of a soldier. They're coming out with lower, lighter body armor, lower, lighter weapon systems, a lot of high-speed, low-drag, low-weight stuff, so that you can carry more. You're still going to carry 120 pounds or 80 pounds, 90 pounds. It's just going to be more of it. It's going to weigh less individually. The combined load still be more. To the right there, you see the soldier with what's called a robotics system or robot system in front of him. Robots are a up-and-coming thing, and we're going to see more of that in the military services. In the middle bottom of the page, you see basically a bank of computer consoles. The military is extremely network-centric now. Everybody's tied into each other with what's called NIPRNet and SIPRNet. So they can produce intelligence, distribute operations orders very quickly. You see the MQ-9 Reaper, the drone. It does ISR, eye in the sky, intelligence gathering, and it carries missiles that will hit targets very accurately. The Navy's coming out with some stealth boats that supposedly won't be seen by the adversary. They're expensive, and they may work. We'll see. There's lasers being mounted on vehicles now, going through testing. That's going to revolutionize warfare if they ever can find the battery packs big enough for those laser beams. And then there's also the area of miniaturization, where they're putting cameras on mechanical flies, which is another interesting part of the technology. So in summary, the current status of the military, it's in good condition. It's worn out. The men are worn out. The women are worn out. The equipment's worn out. But it's still in good shape. We've got some good people serving now. They're doing a great job. National security, we've got a lot of threats and challenges. But we're still the #1 military power in the world. And we've got a lot of good allies around the world. NATO's being one of the best. The role of services have changed a little bit. There's a lot of interoperability. The services are working more closely together, particularly overseas. There's real competition for funds. That always takes place. We're going to be expanding into space and cyber ops. They haven't exactly figured out how we're going to do that doctrinally or organizationally, but that's coming down the road. The conflicts are going to continue. Afghanistan, that's a long war. I was here 2002, 2003, 2010, 2011, then I retired, then I spent 6 more years as a contractor there. The Afghans aren't going to change. 14th century folks with cell phones and cars. It's not going to change. Iraq, stability is always going to be an issue. You're always going to have that Shia Sunni fight. Syria, same thing, a lot of questions marked there. Yemen's going to be tough to solve. And Somalia, that's another tough one there. So I see all those conflicts continue, and I see more conflicts taking place. Threats, probably not going to see the big war. Hybrid warfare is most likely. Terrorism is going to continue. And that's all I have. I don't know if we have time for questions. Probably not. No time for questions.
Question in the audience?
Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you very much for both your report and then, more importantly, for your years of service to the country.
Thank you.
The question is, with your years of experience and expertise, you still play the role that you you still play a role in what you just described?
I can't answer that question. I'm still operational. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding. I retired in 2012 at the 40-year service, basically all special forces. That's where me and Greg became acquainted. We worked together for a while. And then after that, I worked as a current service advisor full-time in Afghanistan for 3 years. And then I worked in Afghanistan part-time trips, 2 months at a time in Afghanistan as an advisor doing that security force assistance mission. I finally retired I left Afghanistan in March 2017. Yeah. I was getting off a helicopter at some remote site, carrying a rucksack, body on the helmet, and I said, what the heck am I doing? I could be home driving my tractor. So currently, I've not worked for a year and a half. I'm the editor of Soft News, so I read the news every day for about 3-4 hours, then I write an article about 600 to 800 words, publish it, and then I get on my tractor and play.
The status report was riveting from a layman's point of view.
So I'd like to present John with a certificate of appreciation and thank him for his time. And a little known fact, the selectmen in Hamilton approved drones for the Hamilton Police Department. You may see them overhead, and they're all wearing that exoskeleton. You can see why they're so big and massive over here. All right, so we'll move on to what we do every year. We recognize someone from the Hamilton Fire Department and Police Department. Right there. So I'd like to recognize the person that was selected this year from the fire department for outstanding service to the community. This person was appointed in 1990, became full-time in 98, was made a lieutenant in 2000, fire inspector in 2010, captain in 2016. He's received an associate's degree from Fire Science in the fall of 2018, and will be our next chief in the new year, January. He was described as always going out of his way to help people. He has purchased and installed pumps for people during storms that have needed assistance in town. He's plowed and shoveled people during snowstorms, and he's always ready to help out. So if we could please welcome Ray Burnett. Congratulations, Ray.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
And from the police department, this individual joined the police department in 2006 as an auxiliary officer, 2007 as a reserve officer, and 2011 as a full-time officer. Prior to working here, he worked as a school safety officer in Peabody, and he received a certificate for performing heroic life-saving efforts after a student suffered an emergency. He's also worked as a corrections officer at the Milton House of Correction, and he received his drill instructor's award during that time frame. Since joining Hamilton Police Department, he's received the Meritorious Service Award for taking an armed suspect into custody that was trying to harm himself. He's also received a unit citation for his involvement in a child abduction case. He's also credited for delivering a baby while on a medical call. I mean, what more could you ask for? And he's currently assigned to the patrol division and working on the evening shift. And I went through the police academy, and he showed me how fast those cars can go when we went on our training. I think it was 130, wasn't it? He's also got a stellar family history. His father's here today. His father's a current serving police officer in Peabody. His father was a police officer in Peabody, and they have his family member who was a KIA in Vietnam. So, without further ado, Mike. what we like to do is recognize the cooking staff. So let me go back here and have them come out. Come on out. They're all shy. So again, thank you to the Sons on Billy for their preparation of our breakfast today. And our manager, Joe Hanson, for putting everything together. Thank you all. And a couple, as you can see, serve on our rifle squad. So as a reminder, we do a silent march from the town hall into the cemetery to recognize the 11-11-11 hour for World War I. We'll depart the town hall about 10:30, 10-15 minute walk, and do our service. And then afterwards, we're going to rededicate the tank at the Patton Park, and you're all welcome to attend. Short speeches. I'm sure the chairman won't make it a long speech. So I want to thank everybody. Is any alibis in the room? Anybody have any further comments or questions? All right. So we're going to, as I got reminded, close with a prayer. If everybody could stand.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we deem this a fitting time to pay our respects to our departed comrades. As we stand with bowed heads in reverence to them, let us remember the good deeds they accomplished. Let us revere them as good soldiers who fought a good fight in a just cause. Let us silently pray for peace, a peace that passes all understanding. And let us mind and soul consecrate our hearts and lives to the real America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, the America worth fighting for. As we stand in this silence to our departed comrades, may we sincerely say, may their souls rest in peace. Amen.
And again, we all appreciate the community showing up. You make this a great event because this isn't about us. This is about our community. And we love having you here. Thank you.